has these, can you see these, these, I don't want to hurt him at the moment. And can you see these legs? Can everyone see on the screen? I'm Harvey Belovski, I'm the Rabbi of the Golders Green Synagogue and various other things. But today I have learnt a very important lesson. Last year, when I spoke in this hall about whether turbot is kosher, to which the answer was no, I made an unfortunate throwaway remark. And that was, oh, locusts, we can look at that next year. And Michael Leventhal, the founder of Gefiltefest, is one of the most persuasive people I know, and has held me to it and reminded me persistently throughout the year that I'd made this promise. And I have, over the last few months, conducted a research project which has disgusted my children and bored my guests, some of whom are in the audience. And today I'm delighted that we can actually have a proper class, not just from text, but possibly with live demonstration of whether or not locusts are kosher. It's interesting, of course, that, as you may know, in other cultures, people have completely different sensitivities about food. In places in Asia, eating bugs, insects, rodents is quite normal, and people are very surprised about the Western revulsion for these things. Nonetheless, the Torah does actually generally shares that revulsion for creepy crawlies and insects. The world media are fascinated by the coincidence of Pesach and the plague of locusts, and the promise of a locust plague in southern Israel in March this year. Actually, locust plagues are one of the most serious problems for the Middle East, and until recent years, in the absence of pesticides, caused utter devastation. There were locust plagues in 2005 and in earlier years this century, and most importantly in the 1950s. But the 1915 locust plague, now some 98 years ago, was utterly devastating, and you can get some small sense of how it was from the last source on this page. But the world media was fascinated by the locust plague in Israel, how they control it, of course today using pesticides, and by people considering whether you should eat them as a way of controlling them and actually benefiting from some free, easily available protein. The Torah gives a list of kosher animals, kosher birds, kosher fish, how to identify them. We're probably familiar with those. I spoke a little bit about fish last year. But a passage which you usually skip over because it's of no direct interest, we have the following biblical verses. Having told you that creepy crawlies and insects are all forbidden, however, from this locust category you may eat the following: the red locust after its species, the yellow locust after its species, the spotted grey locust after its species, and the white locust after its species. But any other flying insect that has 4 legs is an abomination for you. Do locusts require shechita? You know, you kind of know how can you shecht a locust? It sounds rather impractical, but it is a real question, and the answer is, just like fish, you just catch them. Locusts, you just catch them too. They don't require shechita. They're not considered meaty. This is what a locust looks like. I'm going to give one for you to hold as well. Here we go. Let's get another one out. Here we are. Here's one for you. Oh, I'm sorry, it's escaped. Oh, that's fine. So that's fantastic. Can we just have a little look at Larry here? I think you've got Loretta, but this is Larry. Larry is rather unhappy with being held like this. So this is Larry. You can see his head, and you can see that Larry has 4 legs. 1, 2, 3, 4. In addition to Larry's legs, he also has these. Can you see these? These. I don't want to hurt him at the moment. And can you see these legs? Can everyone see on the screen? Well, if I move my thumb, he's going to fly off. Can you see that? Right? Don't hold it by the head. But I have to tell you something absolutely remarkable. My 10-year-old daughter, it turns out this was the relevant section of the Torah, a few weeks ago. And I asked her when I was in the middle of this project, one that she hasn't been very enthusiastic about, There is in fact a 200-page academic work published by Bar-Ilan University Press in Hebrew, entirely devoted to the tradition of eating locusts and identifying the features of locusts in Jewish sources. I read this book in preparation for this talk. It didn't make it apparently into the Sunday Times non-fiction bestseller list. But nonetheless, she said, at school they told us how to identify a kosher locust. Do you know how? She didn't tell me legs, wings, jumping legs. It has the letter Chet on its tummy. That's what she comes home with. It has the letter Chet on its tummy. So I think this is a Bubbermeister. That can't possibly be true. Until I started to look into it. There's a 14th century source at the top of this section on page 3, which says the locust that is kosher has the letter Chet. It's like stamped on its belly. This is going to be the most difficult thing for the camera to show you, because it really does. I'm not exactly sure that it's an anatomical name for this part of the locust, but can everyone see it now? The chagav, the kosher variety, has a Chet shaped impressed on its belly. We've gone through a few boxes of locusts in preparation for this talk, and everyone has the Chet on its tummy. There are no Ashkenazi traditions to eat locusts for a very clear and obvious reason. Ashkenazi Jews did not live in places where locusts appeared. It was very rare. It was not something that was common at all. However, North African and Yemenite Jews lived in places where sometimes often, but at least from time to time, there were significant or sometimes colossal numbers of locusts. It's always attracted press interest, at least since the 50s, that when there were locust plagues in the Negev, the Ashkenazim are kind of running for cover, and the Yemenites are going out with nets to collect them because it was a food that they were familiar with from the Yemen, sometimes rather enjoyed, but was no longer available now that most of Yemenite Jewry had relocated to Israel. That the Yemenite tradition preserved in communities who since the very earliest times of Jewish life have known the correct identifying feature of the Yemenite Jews, and some North African Jews, there are some Egyptian Jews who have passed these traditions on. But clearly the vast majority of world Jewry, the Ashkenazim and most Sfaradim as well, do not have a tradition in their corpus of traditions to identify locusts. So here's the big question. Am I, or you for that matter, if you're not from the Yemenite tradition, allowed to transport a tradition from one part of the community to another, to rely on it? Not, God forbid, to suggest it's unreliable, but to say, okay, it's reliable, and it's fine for them to eat it. But it doesn't mean that I could eat it. And of course, inevitably, people differ on this issue. Let's put it in one sentence. May a non-Yemenite eat locusts based on the Yemenite tradition? Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, a very important current member of the Jerusalem rabbinate, is stringent for Ashkenazim, means that it does not allow Ashkenazim to rely on this tradition, as apparently is Rabbi Menashe Klein, a very famous Haredi American rabbi. However, Rabbis Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg, who died a couple of years ago, perhaps one of the most prominent Ashkenazi rabbis in Israel, and Rabbi Moshe Sternbuch, who interestingly is the head of the Eder Haredis, which is the separatist, what we call the ultra-Orthodox separatist court in Jerusalem, is much more amenable to the idea. And apparently they both say, second hand, but apparently they both say that if you're clear that the Yemenite tradition is reliable, which I think we are, why on earth couldn't other Jews rely on that tradition in order to eat them?